31st of January 1944. The Luga River lies black under a thin skin of ice, and Kingisepp burns somewhere beyond the far bank. In the grey silence before dawn, Senior Sergeant Mikhail Sokolov, combat engineer, squad leader and reluctant gambler, walks onto the frozen current with an auger and a rope around his waist. German flares bloom overhead. Machine gun fire searches the river like a knife. Behind him, an entire offensive is stalled. Guns, trucks, ammunition, waiting on one impossible question. Can a bridge be built where the river refuses to hold? One wrong measurement, one panicked driver, one crack too far, and the crossing becomes a mass grave of steel and men. This is the night the engineers race the river itself and win. The river that won't hold. 31st January 1944. Luga River, East Bank, outskirts of Kingisepp. Leningrad Front. The night has a sound before it has a shape. First comes the far-off thud. Artillery somewhere beyond the dark line of trees, followed by the long, thin whistle of shells passing overhead like metal breath. Then the river answers, not with waves, but with a low, restless cracking that travels under the ice in slow pulses. On the east bank of the Luga, Senior Sergeant Mikhail Sokolov crouches with his shoulders hunched against the wind. His padded telegrapher is stiff with frost at the seams. His mittens are too thick for the delicate work, so he has pulled them back and tucked them into his armpits, bare fingers already stinging as they touch iron. He sets the bit of an auger into the ice. The first turn bites with a dry squeal. The second shudders. By the third he can feel the river's uncertainty, layers that froze, thawed, and froze again. Glassy and treacherous, not the solid blue ice of a hard winter, but something patched together by weather and luck. Behind him, a small group of engineers waits in the shadow of the bank. They stand close to each other without speaking. Their breath hangs pale in the air. One man holds a coil of rope. Another grips a bundle of thin stakes like spears. A third has a canvas bag of chalk and cloth strips, improvised markers that will matter more than any rifle if traffic starts moving in the dark. Above them, the night is not fully black. The snow reflects a sickly light from the eastern horizon where the front is burning. Villages, ammunition dumps, whatever the Germans could not carry away. From the rear, a staff car has delivered orders less than an hour ago. The battalion commander didn't waste words. Kingisepp must fall tonight, no later than dawn. The main bridge in town is gone. The retreating Germans have had time to do what they always do. Demolish spans, seed the approaches with mines, set charges in culverts, and pull their rearguards back to positions where they can watch every road. To take Kingisepp, Soviet riflemen and guns need to get across the Luga fast. Fast enough that the enemy doesn't have time to dig in on the west bank, fast enough that the pursuit keeps its teeth. A river is supposed to be an obstacle. Tonight it is a test. Sokolov works the auger deeper. Each rotation sends a vibration up his forearms. He keeps his head down, listening for the change in pitch that tells him he's broken through. A flare blooms somewhere upstream, German likely, hanging like a small white moon above the trees. For a moment, everything becomes sharp. The glitter of snow, the dark river line, the angular silhouettes of men with tools. Down, someone whispers. They drop, almost reflexively. Sokolov stays where he is, making himself small over the hole. If you stop working every time the enemy lights the sky, you will never finish anything in winter. The flare dies. Darkness returns. He turns the auger again. There's a wet sigh. The bit breaks through. Black water wells up immediately, thick and silent, and for an instant it seems to drink the light around it. Sokolov leans in, squinting, and slides a simple measuring rod down the hole. Wood with marks carved into it. Nothing fancy, but it tells the truth. He counts. He does the arithmetic without saying it aloud. He has done this in other winters on other rivers, but not with an offensive moving this fast and enemy guns this close. The number is not what he wants. Thin, he mutters, and the word fogs in front of his mouth. A man beside him, Kostya, young, cheeks raw from cold, leans in as if he can argue with physics. How thin? Sokolov looks back at the bank. Somewhere in the trees an officer is waiting for an answer that can be translated into orders, yes or no, safe or dead. Infantry can cross, Sokolov says. Guns, maybe. Trucks only if we build it, and we build it right. A second shell whistles overhead, closer. It lands beyond the river with a dull thump that sends snow puffing off branches. The Germans are not firing blindly. They know the river is the hinge point. They have learned the hard way what Soviet engineers mean when they start measuring ice. Sokolov takes the rope coil and loops it around his waist. The other end goes to two men on the bank, braced like anchors. If the ice gives, they can haul him out, if they're fast and if the rope doesn't freeze stiff first. He steps forward onto the river. The ice complains under his boot, a brittle, high-pitched sound like glass under pressure. He spreads his weight carefully, knees bent, moving the way he has been taught, slow, flat-footed, never trusting one step until the next is ready. He pauses after 10 paces, drills again. Another hole, another measure. The thickness changes. It is worse here. Snow-insulated ice, softer, layered wrong, the kind that looks solid and kills men who believe it. On the far bank, faint shapes move, German outposts perhaps, or trees shifting in the wind. He cannot tell. He does not need to. He knows they are there, and that at any moment a machine gun can open and stitch the river with tracers, turning this careful, quiet work into panic. He keeps drilling anyway, because somewhere behind him, on frozen roads churned into ruts, columns are forming. Rifle regiments ready to attack, artillery crews waiting for orders, drivers gripping steering wheels with numb hands, all of it held up by a single question. Will the Luga hold? Sokolov stands over the next hole, water dark at his feet, and imagines the crossing that isn't there yet. Lanes marked with stakes, logs laid like ribs beneath a deck of planks, a path across a river that refuses to be trusted. He looks back toward the bank and raises one hand, 2 fingers extended, then a flat palm. Signals instead of shouting. A language the enemy can't easily hear. 2 fingers, bring tools forward. Flat palm, stop vehicles until further notice. The men move, shadows carrying axes and saws and bundles of timber toward the ice. The work has begun. Choosing the crossing site. The engineers come onto the ice in a staggered line, spaced out so one crack won't take them all at once. No one walks heel to toe. Everyone moves like they're carrying a tray of boiling water. The only light is what the snow gives back from the sky. Sokolov stays ahead, auger in one hand, measuring rod in the other. He marks each test hole with a short stake and a strip of cloth tied low so it won't flap. White cloth for safe thickness, dark cloth for danger. Nothing high, nothing that catches the eye from the west bank. A voice behind him, close to the ear, quiet but sharp. Senior Sergeant. Lieutenant Karpov has come down from the bank. Engineer officer, map case under his arm, pistol holstered high under his coat. He looks older than he is because winter makes everybody older. Report, Karpov says. Sokolov keeps his eyes on the ice while he answers. The thickness changes by the span. Near bank is workable, midstream is layered, weak spots, upstream by the bend is better. Karpov glances toward the dark outline of Kingisepp. Somewhere there is the broken bridge, the obvious crossing point, the one every commander wants, because it leads straight into town and straight onto the roads beyond. But the obvious point is also where the Germans will be looking. They hear it first. A burst of machine gun fire from the west bank, short and probing, followed by another. Tracers streak low, not yet reaching them, but close enough that the men instinctively flatten their shoulders. The Germans are sweeping, testing, waiting to catch silhouettes against the snow. Karpov's jaw tightens. If we cross at the bridge, he says, we cross under their eyes. And the ice near the bridge is worse, Sokolov adds. He doesn't have to say why. The river runs faster near damaged pilings and broken spans. Current chews the underside of ice, makes it thin and treacherous even when the surface looks solid. If you put weight there, the river will choose the moment of collapse. Karpov signals with 2 fingers. 2 engineers crawl forward, carrying a length of rope with knots tied at intervals, measuring spacing. Another pair carries a long pole, probing ahead like blind men feeling for a step. They move toward the direction Sokolov indicated, slightly upstream, away from the demolished bridge, toward a spot where the trees come closer to the bank and the river broadens into a quieter reach. It's still not safe. Nothing here is safe. But it is less predictable in a way the engineers can work with. Karpov kneels beside one of Sokolov's marked holes and runs his fingers along the edge where ice meets water. He sees the layers, the way the winter has refrozen over earlier cracks. He knows what that means for load-bearing. Infantry tonight, he says, guns and vehicles by morning. That is the order. Sokolov nods once. Then we build an ice crossing with reinforcement, not just a footpath. Karpov turns his head, listening. Over the river comes the hollow clack of German tools, some kind of work on their side too. Maybe they're wiring charges. Maybe they're laying mines on the west bank approaches. Maybe they're simply preparing to pull back again. In 1944, the German retreat is a series of delayed exits. The rearguards fight hard, then vanish. "Where do we tie in?" Karpov asks. Sokolov points with the measuring rod. "Here, near the old track. There's a shallow slope, less ice pressure at the bank. If we clear snow and flood it, we can thicken the first 10 meters. For vehicles, we need clean approaches. Corduroy on the east bank. On the west, if it's mined, we'll have to breach under fire." They both look toward the bank. The road behind them is a churn of frozen ruts. Somewhere out there, the first elements of the rifle regiments are waiting with rifles slung and bayonets wrapped to keep them from shining. Somewhere farther back, artillery is being unlimbered. The front is moving, whether the engineers are ready or not. Karpov raises a hand and signals to the shore. One long sweep, then a jab. A runner scrambles off, bent low, boots crunching quietly in snow. Minutes later, the first sleds appear, pulled by men instead of horses, timber lashed down, planks stacked, axes and saws clinking softly. Someone has brought rolls of wire and bundles of fascines, brushwood tied tight, crude but useful. Another team carries picks and shovels for the banks, where frozen earth is harder than stone. Sokolov steps off the ice and climbs the east bank to meet the incoming load. There, in a shallow depression screened by scrub, a small command post has been established. A field telephone line snaked along the ground, a map spread on a crate, a lantern with its light shuttered. Karpov points at the map with a gloved finger. "We will cross here, upstream of the bridge. We mark 2 lanes, one for foot, one for traffic. We keep them separated." "2 lanes on ice?" one of the engineers asks, incredulous. Karpov's eyes flick to him. Not 2 lanes wide, 2 routes, one to keep infantry moving, even if traffic stalls. If trucks start bunching on the ice, we'll kill ourselves without the Germans firing a shot. Sokolov feels the weight of that. It's not the artillery that kills crossings. Often it's impatience. A driver pushes forward, another follows. The ice does what ice does. Karpov takes the field telephone handset. His voice stays low, controlled. "This is engineer post. Selected crossing point upstream. Request covering fire on west bank tree line. Also smoke, intermittent, not continuous. We will begin reinforcement immediately." He listens, then replaces the handset. Sokolov gestures to his squad. "Stakes first, mark the route, then clear snow. Ice must be bare if we're going to flood and thicken it." The men move out, purposeful now. Stakes go in at intervals, low and steady, forming a narrow corridor across the river. Sokolov walks the line himself, probing with the pole, drilling at the worst-looking patches, relocating the route by meters when the ice tells him to. A flare rises again, higher this time, washing the river in pale light. The Germans are searching, closer to their line now. A machine gun opens and walks fire across the ice, the rounds snapping and ricocheting like angry insects. Sokolov presses his face into the snow and waits for the sweep to pass. The ice beneath him trembles with impacts, and for a second it feels like the whole river is waking. Then the gunfire stops. Silence returns in pieces. Sokolov lifts his head, spits snow from his mouth, and gets back to work. The crossing site is chosen. Now it has to be made real, before dawn, before the Germans adjust their aim, before the offensive outruns its own lifeline. The approaches must exist before the bridge. The crossing line is only a string of low stakes on a black, breathing river, a route on paper, a promise. To make it real, the engineers must do 2 jobs at once. Harden the ice itself and build the landward approaches so the first truck doesn't sink axle-deep in snow before it even reaches the river. Senior Sergeant Sokolov brings his squad back to the east bank and points with his chin toward a shallow depression where a cart track disappears into scrub. "Here," he says. Corduroy to the ice, wide enough for 1 vehicle, no stops. A driver's instinct is to brake at a river. That instinct will kill them. Vehicles on ice must roll steady, spaced out, never bunching, like beads on a string. Men unload logs from sleds. Short sections cut earlier from the nearby woodline, pine and birch, bark still on. They drop them onto the snow and begin laying them side by side across the track, perpendicular to the direction of travel. It's crude engineering, old as armies, a corduroy road. Over it they throw branches and packed snow, stamping it down with boots and the flat sides of shovels until the surface is firm enough to take weight. Axes bite in rhythm, saws rasp, tools clink like distant bells. Across the river, a German flare rises and hangs. Its white glare turns the men into shapes on a bright sheet of snow. "Freeze," Sokolov hisses. They do, half bent over, eyes down. Movement draws bullets. Stillness sometimes is invisible. A burst of machine gun fire tears across the bank, rounds snapping into the tree line and throwing up splinters and powdery snow. Not aimed, not yet, searching. The enemy knows a crossing must happen. They are hunting for the exact spot. The flare dies. Darkness returns like a curtain. Sokolov is already moving. Faster, keep it low. No shouting. One of his men, Kostya, hauls a pick to the river's edge and starts cutting into the frozen bank. The east bank is not a gentle slope, it's a stiff lip of hard frozen earth. Wheels will hit it and spin, tracks will dig in and stall. The engineers must carve a ramp. They work in pairs. One breaks, one shovels, one drags the spoil away so it doesn't pile up where it will later become an obstacle. A shallow ramp emerges. Nothing pretty, but enough to guide tyres and tracks down onto the ice without a sudden drop. Behind them, Lieutenant Karpov's telephone line is alive with murmurs. A runner brings the message that covering fire has been approved. Somewhere to the rear, Soviet batteries shift their aim. A moment later, the first shells go over. Not a barrage, but measured. You can hear the difference when guns fire for a purpose. Impacts thud into the west bank tree line, and the sound echoes down the river corridor. The Germans answer with their own artillery. A deeper boom, then a shell that lands too close, throwing a fan of snow across the engineers' worksite. Sokolov's men flinch, then force themselves back into motion. Winter work is a discipline of hands that keep moving even when the mind wants to crawl into a hole. "Infantry coming," Karpov says, appearing at Sokolov's shoulder. Out of the darkness behind the engineers, shapes arrive. Riflemen in white camouflage capes, faces wrapped, bayonets taped to reduce glint. They move in a quick, compressed line, heads down, rifles hugged close. A platoon leader stops near the bank and leans in. "Where?" he whispers. Sokolov points, not with a finger, but with his whole hand, palm low, indicating the staked corridor on the ice. "Follow the markers. Single file, 10 paces between men, no running." The platoon leader nods once. No debate. He knows what the river means. The first riflemen step onto the ice the way Sokolov did earlier, flat-footed, knees bent, weight-controlled. The stakes guide them into the dark. Sokolov watches them go with a tight feeling in his chest. A bridgehead on the far side will change everything. If Soviet infantry can dig in on the west bank, they can reduce direct fire on the crossing. If they fail, the engineers will be trying to build under a machine gun's gaze. Karpov leans close. Now the ice. Sokolov's squad drags shovels and brooms, bundled branches out onto the river. The first step in strengthening ice is simple and miserable. Clear the snow. Snow is insulation. Leave it and the ice won't thicken. Clear it and the cold can do its job. They sweep a lane bare along the staked corridor, scraping down to hard, slick ice that shines faintly in the dark. The wind bites at exposed surfaces. That is what they want. Cold on ice. Cold that turns water into strength. Then comes the method that separates a footpath from a crossing. Controlled flooding. Sokolov and 2 men take axes and chop a long, narrow opening near the east bank, an intake. Water wells up, black and immediate, and the sound changes. A soft gurgle under the constant crackle of the river. With buckets and improvised scoops, cut fuel cans, shallow pans, they throw water onto the cleared lane in thin sheets. Not too much at once. Too much water pools, freezes unevenly and creates weak spots. Thin layers repeated, each one freezing fast in the air like lacquer. The ice becomes a workpiece, built up by cold and time measured in minutes. Midway across, Sokolov stops and listens. He has learned to hear danger before he sees it. A low groan runs under his boots, then a sharp crack that travels outward. He signals to halt. The men freeze in place, balanced, silent. Sokolov kneels and presses his ear to the ice. Underneath, the river's slow movement, the whisper of current. It isn't a break, not yet. It's the ice speaking, warning that weight is clustering. He gestures, spreading his arms wide, widen spacing. The men obey, stepping carefully apart so the load distributes. Only then does he wave them forward again. On the far bank, the first Soviet riflemen have reached land. A short burst of gunfire rattles, then another closer. Grenades pop like muffled doors slamming. The bridgehead fight has begun. Sokolov keeps flooding and sweeping. He can't look away for long, but he listens to the far side sounds the way a sailor listens to weather. Every burst tells him whether the enemy is surprised, whether they are reacting with discipline, whether the West Bank will become safer or deadlier. Above, another flare rises, this one red, drifting slower. German illumination, closer to their line. Sokolov's lane on the ice gleams faintly where the new water has frozen. A thin skin, just a start. By morning it has to carry more than men. It has to carry the offensive itself. The ice bridge method. The cleared lane on the Luga is a strip of dull, wet shine. Thin floods have already frozen into a new skin, smooth, deceptively calm. It is still only a footpath unless they make it into something else. Lieutenant Karpov steps onto the ice and stops beside Sokolov as another group of riflemen slips past, single file, 10 paces apart. The infantry smell like wet wool and gun oil. They don't look at the river. They look at the far bank where the fight is now a series of sharp sounds, short bursts, a grenade popping, a shouted command muffled by wind. Karpov keeps his voice down. The crossing must take traffic, now. Sokolov doesn't argue. He looks at the lane he has cleared and flooded, then at the sled stacked with timber. To carry weight on ice, you do not ask the ice to be stronger than it is. You spread the load so the ice never sees a single point of pressure long enough to fail. You build a bridge on the ice that turns wheels and tracks into something like a long, gentle hand. He signals his squad in short gestures they've practiced until it's instinct. 2 men, bring logs. 1 man, stakes and wire. 1 man, axes, saws and the heavy sledge to drive anchors into the bank. They drag the first logs out, straight pine, roughly a man's arm thick, cut to lengths that can be handled without cranes. The logs scrape over the ice with a low rasp. Sokolov makes them stop every few meters to rest the load, not because they are tired, but because he can hear the ice complain when too much weight clusters. He kneels, pulls a small notebook from inside his coat, pages stiff with cold, and flips to a simple table copied months ago from a winter crossing instruction. Numbers that become law when the river is under you. How thick ice must be for men, for horses, for light vehicles, for trucks. The table assumes perfect ice, good cold, no current. The Luga tonight is none of those things. He closes the notebook and makes the adjustment in his head. We build for uncertainty, he murmurs, then looks up. We build the protective decking. The first step is ribs. Sokolov positions the logs perpendicular to the direction of travel, like sleepers under a rail line. He uses the knotted measuring rope to keep spacing consistent, close enough to distribute weight, far enough that they can work fast. Each log is shoved into place and then seated so it won't roll. That means chopping shallow notches into the ice with an axe and driving the log down until it bites. It is loud work. Every strike carries across the river like a bell. Karpov winces at the sound, then forces himself not to. Quiet is already lost. The only question now is speed. Sokolov's men lash the transverse logs together with wire where they can, and where wire is too slow. They use what they have, short stakes hammered into ice beside the logs to keep them from drifting. In places they throw brushwood mats, bundles of branches tied tight under the logs, then flood water over everything so it freezes into a single mass. Ice, wood, ice again. A flare rises on the west bank, white and high. The river corridor turns bright. Down, someone calls. Sokolov drops flat between 2 logs. The ice is colder than any ground. He can feel the river's presence through it, like a living thing. Machine gun fire rips across the staked lane. Bullets smack into logs, splintering bark. 1 round cracks off ice close enough that Sokolov feels the sting of fragments. The men on the lane freeze in place, pressed low, tools clutched. Then from behind them, Soviet artillery answers. 2 quick salvos into the west bank tree line. The machine gun stutters, pauses, then resumes. Less confident, shifting position. The flare dies. Sokolov is already up. Move, he hisses. Notch, seat, flood. Next. Now come the runners. 2 long logs are laid lengthwise along the lane, 1 on each side, forming rails that guide wheels and keep them from drifting toward the stakes. Between those rails, planks are laid in a rough deck. Some planks are proper lumber, others are split from logs on the spot, uneven but serviceable. The deck does not have to be beautiful, it has to be continuous. Sokolov walks the length, stamping lightly with his boot to test each section. Where a plank rocks, he yanks it up and forces snow and slush under it, then floods again. Water is their mortar, the cold is their cement. At the east bank, a traffic control post takes shape. 2 engineers with hooded lanterns that can be pinched down to a slit of light, a whistle, a length of rope across the approach. They are not there to help vehicles cross. They are there to stop vehicles crossing at the wrong time. Because the fastest way to break an ice crossing is to let drivers decide for themselves. A runner arrives, breathless, face rimed with ice. He leans toward Karpov and speaks quickly. Karpov's expression hardens. He turns to Sokolov. The riflemen have a foothold, but the Germans are counter-firing from the town edge. We must get a gun across, a 76mm, tonight. A field gun is not a truck, but it is still weight, gun, limber, horses or tractor. Too much, too soon, in the wrong place, and the Luga will open. Sokolov looks out at his half-finished deck. He measures distance with his eyes, spacing with the rope knots, thickness with memory of the holes he drilled. He imagines the gun's wheels rolling onto the lane, the ice taking the load, the river deciding whether the engineers have done enough. He makes the decision the way sappers always do, without drama, because drama wastes time. 1 gun, he says, not the tractor, horses only. And we add another layer midstream, double-decking there. Karpov nods once, then pivots to shout low orders toward the bank. Sokolov's squad hauls more planks onto the ice. They lay them crosswise over the first deck in the weakest midstream section, creating a thicker mat. More flooding, more freezing. The lane becomes a patchwork of wood locked into ice, a bridge that is not a bridge, an engineered compromise with a river that cannot be forced, only persuaded. A red flare rises again, then another. The Germans are closer now, searching harder. Artillery whumps into the far bank, throwing snow up in dull geysers. You can feel each impact through the ice like a heartbeat. And still the engineers keep laying planks, hammering stakes, pouring water, building a road where no road should be. Because behind them you can hear it. The creak of wheels, the snort of horses, the clink of harness. Someone is bringing the gun forward. First test load. The sound reaches the river before the gun does. Iron-shod hooves on frozen ruts, harness rings tapping, the low creak of a limber pole under strain. In the dimness behind the east bank scrub, shapes emerge. 2 small horses in white frosted blankets, heads down, steam pouring from their nostrils as if the cold itself is burning inside them. Behind them rolls a 76mm divisional gun, its shield rimed with ice, its wheels wrapped in packed snow. A ZS-3, common as a soldier's spoon and just as necessary. The gun crew moves with the calm of men who've done this too many times. They keep their voices low, hands on the spokes, ready to break if the approach gives way. Their officer stops at the corduroy track and looks to Lieutenant Karpov, then to Senior Sergeant Sokolov. "How far?" he asks. Sokolov doesn't answer with distance, he answers with rules. 1 gun, horses only, no tractor, steady roll, no halt on the ice, spacing behind you, nothing else enters until you're off. Karpov adds the authority. You cross on my signal. If you stop, you die, and you block the offensive. The gun officer nods once, tight-lipped. There's no room for pride tonight, only physics. Sokolov steps onto the ice ahead of the gun, lantern slit covered by his palm. He walks the reinforced lane, boots sliding slightly on the frozen water glaze, listening. The river speaks in small ways, a faint groan under a plank, a crack that travels but doesn't open, the subtle change in tone when the current is stronger beneath. Halfway out, he squats and taps the decking with the butt of his axe. Solid. Then a few meters further, not solid enough. A plank has shifted, lifted at one edge where the underlying log isn't seated. He signals back, arm low, palm down. Hold. The gun crew freezes at the bank, horses stamping softly, harness leather squeaking. Sokolov kneels, jams his fingers beneath the plank, and feels the gap, thin, but deadly when a wheel hits it. He pulls the plank up, shoves slush and chopped snow into the void, then calls for water. Kostya crawls up with a cut fuel can, pouring a controlled sheet along the seam. The water spreads, black and glossy, and immediately begins to cloud into ice as it meets the cold deck. Sokolov presses the plank down again, boots it into place, and waits just long enough for the first skin to set. A flare rises on the west bank, white, slow, hanging over the river like a held breath. Sokolov flattens his body between the rails of the lane, eyes narrowed against the glare. Across the ice, you can see the far bank now in harsh detail, the tree line, the dim shapes of buildings toward Kingisepp, and there, tiny flashes from a machine gun firing short, controlled bursts. The tracer line walks, searching, inching toward the engineer's work. Then Soviet guns answer with a quick pair of impacts into the tree line, and the machine gun shifts. It hasn't stopped. It has simply moved. The flare dies. Karpov raises his arm and chops it forward. Go! The horses step onto the corduroy approach, hooves thudding on logs. They hesitate at the lip where earth becomes ice. Every animal knows what a river is. The gun crew clicks their tongues and pulls gently, not whipping. Whipping makes panic. Panic makes collapse. The horses step down. The deck takes them, and the lane trembles. You can feel it as much as hear it, the weight moving onto the structure, the ice below responding with a low, long complaint. The gun wheels roll onto the planks, spokes turning slowly, packed snow falling away in little crumbs. The gun shield glints once, briefly, then disappears into shadow as they move deeper onto the river. Steady, Sokolov murmurs, as if the word itself is another reinforcing log. The crossing is a discipline of space. Sokolov keeps ahead, watching every plank, every joint. Karpov stands at the bank with the traffic control engineers, one hand on the rope barrier that keeps the next vehicle back. Behind that rope, drivers and commanders hover in the darkness, wanting to push, wanting to surge forward. Tonight, the engineers are the only thing preventing that urge from breaking the ice faster than the Germans can. Midstream, the sound changes. A sharp crack runs under the deck, fast as a whip. Then another, deeper, as if someone has snapped a thick board beneath the river. One of the horses shies, tossing its head. The gun wheel bumps as it crosses a seam. Sokolov's stomach tightens. He raises his arm and makes a circling motion. Keep moving, don't stop. Then swings his hand low toward the left rail, guiding the gun crew to stay centered over the strongest ribs. The next crack is louder. For a fraction of a second, the left wheel dips, just an inch, maybe two, enough to make the gun shield lurch and the crew's breath catch. The horses strain, legs splaying slightly on slick planks, and you can imagine the whole lane failing like glass. Sokolov is already at the wheel. He throws his shoulder into the gun carriage and shouts the only thing that matters. Pull! The crew leans into the traces. The horses dig in. The wheel climbs back onto the plank as if released by an unseen hand. But the warning is clear. The deck is at its limit here. Sokolov drops to his knees and looks between the rails. The ice beneath is spider-webbed with fine cracks radiating outward. Not an open break, not yet, but the kind of stress pattern that becomes catastrophe if another load follows too soon. He scrambles forward and signals back with both arms, crossing them hard over his chest. Stop all traffic. Karpov sees it instantly and snaps orders at the bank. The rope barrier goes tight. Men push back the eager drivers. No one likes being told, wait, not when the offensive is moving, not when the Germans are retreating, and every minute feels like victory. But the river doesn't care about victory. It cares about weight. The gun keeps rolling. It has to. If it stops midstream, the ice will fail under static load faster than it will under motion. Under another flare, this one red, German fire snaps across the lane again, bullets thudding into planks and sending splinters skittering. The gun crew doesn't return fire. They don't lift their rifles. Every hand is on the task of staying upright, staying moving, staying alive. At last the horses reach the far bank. The gun climbs the west side ramp, crude hacked into frozen soil by the first infantry to cross, and disappears into the darkness beyond. A moment later you hear it. The gun's breech clack, then the hollow boom of a first round fired westward into Kingisepp's edge. The bridgehead has teeth now. Sokolov remains on the ice, staring at the cracked midstream section. The lane held, but it spoke, and it said, one more mistake, and the river takes everything. He turns and waves his men forward with timber and water. They will thicken the weak point before the next load. There will be no second chance tonight. When ice isn't enough, you make it share the load. The gun's first round has barely finished, echoing off the far bank buildings when Lieutenant Karpov is already looking past the river, past what they've done, toward what the offensive will demand next. A single field gun across the Luga means the bridgehead can breathe. It does not mean the bridgehead can eat. A fight for Kingisepp will drink ammunition faster than men can count. The rifles on the far bank will need boxes of 7.62, grenades, mortar bombs. The gun that just crossed will need shells stacked like firewood. By dawn, the staff will want trucks, not sleds. They will want radios, fuel, medical carts, and, if the enemy gives any pause at all, tanks. Sokolov is still midstream, kneeling over the cracked section where the gun's left wheel dipped. The ice under the decking is marked with stress like fine white veins. It held, but it warned. He waves his men forward with timber and water, and they come in a careful line, each load separated by meters. No one steps where he doesn't step. The lane is a single narrow truth across a black river. They work the weak point fast. 2 more transverse logs go down to tighten the spacing. Planks are doubled again, this time overlapping seams so wheels won't hit the same gap twice. Sokolov has Kostia pour water in thin sheets and then throws powdered snow over it so the freeze happens quickly and evenly. An old trick, not elegant, but it turns slush into a binding skin. On the east bank, the traffic control rope stays up. Drivers curse under their breath. An infantry lieutenant tries to argue that his company needs an ammunition cart now, not later. Karpov doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't have to. If you rush the river, he says, you will have no cart at all, and no company. A fresh flare rises, German, white, and this one is accompanied by a dull thump. Mortar. The round lands near the west bank approach, throwing snow into the air and momentarily blotting out the shapes of the men who have just crossed. The Germans have found the river corridor. Not the exact lane, yet, but close enough that random fire becomes a statistical certainty. Sokolov hears the next crack before he sees anything. A deep groan rolls under the deck, longer than the earlier snap, as if the river is bending a plank you cannot see. He freezes, hand pressed to the wood. Then he understands. It is not the lane failing. It is the current biting at the underside where the decking has forced snow away and exposed the ice to stress. The Luga is not static. It is always moving, and it is always trying to turn their work back into water. He looks toward the east bank and signals to Karpov, one hand slicing forward, then tapping downward twice. Support. Under. Here. Karpov reads it instantly. He turns to the dark behind the trees and barks a short order down the telephone line. A minute later, a different kind of movement begins on the approach road. A column of sleds heavier than the earlier timber loads, pulled by teams of men with ropes over their shoulders, boots digging into frozen ruts. On the sleds are long, awkward shapes under canvas, metal fittings, coils of cable, and the unmistakable outline of flat-bottomed boats. Pontoon equipment. They come with their own foreman, a stocky warrant officer with a face like carved wood. He salutes Karpov with 2 fingers to his cap brim and says, bluntly, "Light park elements. We can float support if you give us water." Sokolov's eyes go to the river surface. Water is the one thing they have too much of and too little access to. "To float anything," Sokolov says, "we cut the ice." Karpov nods. Then cut. It is a brutal instruction. Cutting the ice means destroying what holds them up. But it is also how you make the river carry weight instead of forcing the ice to do it alone. Sokolov leads the pontoon men out onto the lane with saws designed for this work. Long, 2-handled ice saws that bite in a steady rhythm. They choose a point just off the reinforced section, where the decking can still carry men, but should not be asked to carry trucks. They mark a rectangle, then begin sawing. The sound is terrible, metal teeth scraping ice, constant, unmistakable. If German observers are watching, they will know exactly what it means. Engineering at the crossing, a promise of vehicles soon. A flare goes up almost immediately, then another. Machine gun fire cracks across the lane again, spitting splinters from the rail logs. Men press down, tools held close, and the saw teams keep working whenever the fire lifts. There is no neat alternation between building and fighting. Tonight it is all one task. At last the cut section loosens. The saw blades break through and dark water wells up along the edges, swallowing the rectangle as if the river has been waiting to be invited in. Two men hook it with poles and shove, and the slab tilts, slides, and disappears under the surrounding ice with a long, heavy sigh. A hole now exists, an open wound in the crossing. Immediately, the pontoon men go to work. They slide one of the flat-bottomed boats forward on skids, inching it toward the cut. Ropes creak, boots slip. The boat's bow noses into the water and, with a sudden release, floats. The river takes it. They guide it under the lane, positioning it so the decking above will be supported by something that is not ice alone. Cables go down, anchored back to the bank where men hammer iron stakes into frozen ground and lash them with wire and rope. The boat shifts, settles, then holds. Sokolov crawls to the edge of the cut and peers down. Black water moving fast. A pontoon boat below, rocking slightly, ropes taut. Above it, their timber deck, now a hybrid. Part ice road, part floating support, part sheer stubbornness. Karpov's lantern slit opens for a fraction of a second as he checks his watch. They are eating the night in minutes. A runner arrives from the far bank, breath ragged with cold. He leans close to Karpov and speaks. Sokolov catches only fragments. Kingisepp, outskirts. Germans falling back. Need ammunition, now. Karpov looks at the lane, at the reinforced section, at the new floating support, and makes the decision the way command decisions are made in winter. Not because it is safe, but because the alternative is losing momentum. Bring the first truck, he says. Not a column. One. Sokolov's stomach tightens. He steps out onto the lane again, touches the decking with his palm, and listens to the river through wood and ice. Then he raises his arm toward the bank and signals the traffic control post to drop the rope for a single vehicle only. In the darkness behind the trees, an engine turns over, low, reluctant in the cold, and the sound rolls toward the river like a threat. Traffic control becomes a battle. The engine note is low and uneven, as if the cold has thickened the fuel into something reluctant. The truck comes into view through the trees, a ZIS-5, boxy silhouette, headlights blacked out, only a slit lantern on the bumper showing a narrow blade of light on the corduroy approach. The driver sits hunched, scarf wrapped to his eyes, hands stiff on the wheel. A second man rides the running board, boots on the step, one hand gripping the door frame, the other holding a small lantern shaded by his palm. He is an assistant driver or a traffic man pressed into service. Tonight, everyone is both. At the rope barrier, the traffic control engineer raises a gloved hand. Stop. He leans in and speaks into the driver's window. You roll steady, he says. Second gear. No braking. No overtaking. If you see a flare, you do not freeze on the lane. You keep moving. The driver nods once, jaw working. His breath fogs the glass. Lieutenant Karpov stands just behind, watching the truck and, beyond it, the crowd of men and vehicles that want to be next. A horse-drawn cart loaded with ammunition is already nosing forward. A staff officer is arguing, pointing toward Kingisepp as if pointing can change weight limits. Karpov's voice cuts low and sharp. One truck. Then we reassess. Anyone crossing without my order will be shot. No one doubts him, not because they fear him, because they fear the river more, and because they can hear the German mortars now, a dull plop, the whisper of flight, the thump on the far bank. Senior Sergeant Sokolov is already on the ice, midstream, crouched by the reinforced section where the pontoon boat sits under the decking. He keeps his palm on the timber, feeling vibration the way a doctor feels pulse. Every crossing load writes itself into the wood. The truck creeps forward onto the corduroy. Logs thud under tires. The driver eases it down the ramp. The front wheels touch the deck. The lane shudders, not violently, but enough that the men on the ice instinctively spread their stance. The ZS-5 rolls onto the timber and ice bridge like a heavy animal stepping onto a frozen pond. Sokolov keeps his eyes on the tires. A wheel is a point load. Tracks are gentler, but there are no tracks tonight, not yet. The truck's tires must stay centered over the ribs. Too far left, and it rides a seam where ice is weaker. Too far right, and it chews the stake line. He raises one arm and makes small guiding motions. Left, then straight. The assistant on the running board sees him, mirrors the motion, leans into the driver's window and taps twice on the door frame. Adjust. The truck holds center. Then the enemy finds the moment. A German flare rises high and hangs, bleaching the river corridor. Instantly the west bank comes alive with machine gun fire. Longer bursts now, confident. Tracers reach the lane and stitch across it. Bullets thud into the rail logs. A plank splinters and spins off into the darkness. The truck's engine note spikes. Panic. The driver wants to accelerate. Sokolov snaps both hands downward, hard, steady. If the driver guns it, the wheels will bounce, the load will surge, and the ice will take the excuse it wants. The assistant on the running board hammers the roof twice, slow, measured, forcing the driver back into discipline. The flare burns. The lane is bright. Men pressed flat against the decking are suddenly visible. Sokolov feels the crossing become a battlefield in a way that no rifle company could explain. There is no cover here, only movement and timing. From the east bank, Soviet artillery answers, not with a long barrage but with corrective fire, 2-3 shells into the west bank tree line. Snow erupts in white columns. The machine gun falters, shifts, resumes from a slightly different angle. A mortar round lands near the west bank ramp, throwing snow and dirt. Through the flare light, Sokolov sees the far bank infantry, white camouflaged figures, dragging ammunition boxes off their shoulders and into shallow cover. They are trying to build a perimeter with whatever the earth allows. The truck reaches the reinforced midstream section. Sokolov's breath catches as the weight comes over the pontoon-supported span. The decking groans. The river under it is moving fast. The ropes holding the boat taut hum like wire under strain. The truck's right wheel rides a seam and dips a fraction. Sokolov is already there, shoulder against the rail log, pushing the wheel line back towards centre with brute force and hand signals. His gloves are slick with ice water. His forearms burn with cold. Another burst snaps across the lane. Something punches into the wood near his head, and he flattens without thinking, cheek to plank, hearing the bullets crack as if it were spoken in his ear. He doesn't look at the impact. He looks at the truck. Because if the truck stops here, it becomes a dead weight that will break the span. And then the bridgehead starves. The flare finally dies. Darkness returns, carrying the smell of exhaust and fresh split timber. Move, Sokolov whispers, and it is less a command than a prayer to mechanics. The truck crawls on, 10 meters, 20. The engine coughs once, then steadies. The far bank grows nearer. On the east bank, Karpov is fighting his own battle. The moment the truck entered the lane, other drivers tried to edge forward, sure they could just follow. Karpov's men shove them back with shoulders and curses. The rope barrier is pulled taut again. A staff officer tries to duck under it and is physically stopped. "Do you want to explain to the army commander," Karpov says in a voice like ice, "why you put 3 trucks on a bridge built in one night?" The officer stops moving. On the west bank, the truck climbs the ramp, tires spinning briefly on frozen soil, then it's over, off the lane, swallowed by trees and shouting infantry. A moment later, you hear the first ammo crates hit the ground, the hollow clack of wood on wood, and then the quicker sound of men moving with renewed confidence. Sokolov stays on the lane, looking back toward midstream. The reinforced section has held, but the gunfire has torn away planks. The rail log is splintered in one spot. The stakes are still upright, but several cloth markers have been shot away, leaving gaps in the route that could pull a driver into the wrong line. He signals his squad forward. "Repair now," he says, "before the next flare." Karpov appears on the ice edge and leans in. More vehicles will be demanded. Sokolov doesn't answer immediately. He looks at the river, at the patched bridge, at the black water showing through the cut they made, and at the far bank where the fight is drawing nearer to Kingisepp's buildings. Then he nods once. "Then we keep it alive, one at a time, all night. And the engineers go back to work with bullets as punctuation and the river as judge. Dawn pressure, the causeway and the 300-meter shift. The first pale hint of morning is not light so much as less dark, a thinning of the night that makes everything sharper and more dangerous. The river corridor begins to reveal itself, the staked lane, the scarred rail logs, the patched decking, and the men crouched over it with tools that have frozen sweat into their wooden handles. Senior Sergeant Sokolov's gloves are stiff with ice. His fingertips ache in a dull, distant way, like they belong to someone else. He presses his palm to the decking above the pontoon-supported cut and feels the river moving under it. Fast, impatient. The lane has carried a gun and 1 truck. It can carry more, but not by faith. Lieutenant Karpov appears at the east bank edge with a runner at his shoulder. The runner's breath is ragged. He talks too fast for comfort. Bridgehead expanded. Kingisepp edge. Germans pulling back by blocks. Need more ammunition now and medical carts. Karpov listens, then looks past the runner at the approach road. It is already filling. A horse cart with boxy ammunition cases, another truck idling low in the trees, a cluster of riflemen stamping their feet, trying to keep sensation in their toes. Behind them, someone is dragging up more equipment, metal fittings, cable coils, boat sections. The foreman of the pontoon men, stocky and impassive, steps close enough that Sokolov can see the small guard's badge on his cap and the frost on his eyebrows. He says it without pride, like a designation on a crate. First Guards Pontoon Bridge Battalion. We were ordered here in the night. Sokolov feels a grim satisfaction at that. Not because Guards means glory, it means expectations. It means the staff will demand a crossing that works even when the river tries to unmake it. The foreman points across the river toward the black shape of the destroyed bridge downstream. Even in dawn's half-light, you can see its broken geometry. Pilings like teeth, a span collapsed into the water, ice chewed thin around it by current. We cannot work there, the foreman says. The bank's too steep, 40 degrees 50. More. Vehicles will not climb. Karpov nods. That's why we shifted. The foreman's finger tracks upstream, exactly along the route Sokolov chose earlier by instinct and measurement. 300 meters above the destroyed bridge, he says. Correct, but approach is killing us. He gestures back to the east bank low ground that Sokolov's men first crossed in darkness. What looked like a simple track in the night is now visible as a shallow marshy depression, snow over soft ground, frozen in patches, treacherous where it isn't. This must become a road, Karpov says. He doesn't ask, he orders. And so the engineers begin the job that is never shown in victory reports because it is not dramatic, the causeway. Sokolov pulls his squad off the lane and down into the low ground. They drag logs and brushwood and begin laying them into the depression, end to end, side by side, building a gaity, a corduroy causeway, long enough that vehicles can reach the river without bogging and without bunching. It is slow, ugly work. The logs don't fit neatly. The snow hides holes. Men step wrong and sink to the knee in slush that instantly freezes around their boot leather. 2 rows, Sokolov orders, voice flat. Wider. If the first truck slides off, it blocks everything. Axes fall, branches snap, shovels scrape. The causeway lengthens metre by metre, the men stamping it down and packing snow over it, then dragging more logs from sleds. German shells land intermittently on the far bank now, aiming at the bridgehead fight. But every few minutes one falls closer, probing the river corridor. A round detonates on the west side approach and throws a sheet of powder skyward. The sound reaches the engineers as a dull concussion, then a rolling echo off the tree line. Karpov's field telephone line crackles with urgent voices. He stands with the handset pressed to his ear, the wire disappearing into the trees like a vein. He glances at Sokolov and points with 2 fingers, then downward. Faster. Sokolov doesn't waste breath answering. He feels the clock in the stiffness of his wrists, in the way the sky is turning grey. When full daylight arrives, every plank and stake on the ice becomes visible to German observers. Their searching fire will become aimed fire. Back at the river's lip, other engineers attack the bank itself with picks and shovels. The east bank is frozen hard. Each bite of the pick breaks off a chunk like rock. They haul it away, widening the ramp, smoothing the angle so a truck won't spin its wheels and stop on the ice, because stopping on the ice is not a pause. It is a sentence. Sokolov returns to the lane just as the second truck is brought forward to the rope barrier. Karpov meets it with a hard stare. 1 vehicle only, he says. Spacing. The driver nods too quickly. His eyes keep flicking to the sky. Sokolov steps into the lane again and walks backward ahead of the truck, guiding it by hand signals. You can feel the way the whole crossing has changed since midnight. It is no longer a secret operation under cover of darkness. It is a contested, exposed artery, being built and repaired while it is in use. The truck's tires roll onto the decking. The river answers with a low groan. On the far bank, the sound of fighting shifts. Less scattered rifle fire, more controlled bursts, then a brief, sharp series of shouts that carry across the ice. Kingisepp is being taken room by room, street by street, by men who crossed on Sokolov's stakes. A German flare rises, weaker in daylight, an orange smear against the growing grey. Machine gun fire snaps toward the lane again, but now the Soviet artillery responds faster, shells landing in the West Bank tree line with a violence that shakes snow from branches. Sokolov keeps the truck moving, steady, centred. He watches the seams. He listens for the crack that means danger. The truck reaches the pontoon-supported cut. The decking flexes but holds. The ropes hum under tension. The load spreads the way it was designed to spread. The truck crawls on and disappears up the West Bank ramp. Sokolov turns back toward the East Bank and sees the causeway in the low ground. Longer now, rough but real. Men are still laying logs, still packing, still widening. The work has moved from impossible tonight to must function all day. Lieutenant Karpov steps onto the approach, boots crunching on corduroy. He looks at the lane, then at Sokolov, and for the first time his voice carries something like respect. "You measured the ice under fire," he says. "You chose the right shift." Sokolov's answer is simple. The river chose it. In the growing light, you can finally see the stakes stretching across the Luga, low and unassuming, and you understand what the engineers have actually built. Not a heroic monument, but a working road, one that has to survive the next hour and the hour after that, until a proper floating bridge can replace the ice and wood before Thaw or German guns do. From the far bank comes a new sound, closer now, the steady clatter of Soviet boots on frozen ground moving deeper into Kingisepp. The offensive is no longer waiting for the crossing. The crossing must now keep up with the offensive, keeping the crossing alive. Full daylight arrives like an accusation. The staked lane is no longer a secret in the snow. From any rise on the West Bank, a German observer can trace its line. The low stakes, the darker strip of cleared ice, the patched timber decking that looks in daylight too thin to trust with anything heavier than faith. Senior Sergeant Sokolov stands at the midstream reinforcement and watches the surface tremble each time a vehicle crosses. He has stopped counting crossings by number. He counts by behaviour. The driver who keeps a steady roll. The cart that wobbles but does not stop. The man who tries to run and is shoved back into a walk because running makes the ice flex in sharp pulses. The engineers have turned the lane into a controlled system. On the East Bank, traffic control is now an entire post. 2 men with shaded lanterns, one with a whistle, one with a chalkboard listing the order of crossings. Ammunition first, then medical, then radios, then fuel. A rope barrier is not enough anymore. Men stand with rifles slung across their chests, not to shoot Germans, but to stop Soviet drivers from helping by rushing. Lieutenant Karpov moves between them like a metronome, forcing rhythm onto chaos. 10 minutes between trucks, he repeats. 5 between carts, no exceptions. A staff officer from the Rifle Corps arrives, boots crusted with ice, face pinched. He points across the river at the growing sounds of battle inside Kingisepp, the staccato of submachine guns, the sharper cracks of rifles from windows, the occasional dull boom of a gun firing direct. "We need tanks," he says. "Now." Karpov doesn't blink. "Not on this," he answers, and the refusal is absolute. Sokolov can feel the officer's frustration like heat. The offensive has tasted speed. It wants more. But the river is still the river. Instead of arguing, Karpov turns and jerks his head toward the pontoon foreman. "Start the heavy bridge." The foreman nods once and does not waste time explaining what that means. Men begin hauling boat sections down the roughened causeway. The causeway itself is longer now, nearly 200 metres of corduroy and packed snow through the marshy depression. It has cost them hours of hauling and stamping and cursing, and it still wants to swallow wheels if a driver strays an inch. At the bank, another engineer team attacks the earth like miners. Picks ring against frozen ground. Shovels scrape and lift chunks that look like stone. They widen the ramps, cutting them down and back so the angle is gentler. Somebody mutters a number, how much earth they've already shifted, and it sounds unreal in the cold. It isn't unreal. It's simply what the bank demands. Sokolov steps back onto the ice as the pontoon men cut another opening near midstream. The saw teeth whine. Water wells up. A slab slides under with a slow, heavy sigh. Immediately, another flat-bottomed pontoon section noses into the dark water and floats into position, ropes snapping taut as men on the bank haul it into alignment beneath the lane. The crossing is becoming something else, less an ice road with reinforcements, more a hybrid bridge. Wood above, floating support below, ice as the foundation only where it can be trusted. And then the Germans decide to make the river corridor pay. A shell lands short on the ice with a crack that is half explosion, half shattering glass. Snow and splinters spray across the lane. One of the low stakes vanishes. The shock runs through the decking into Sokolov's boots, and for an instant he feels the river lurch beneath him as if the whole surface has shifted. Men flatten, tools scatter, then are snatched back. No one screams, screaming wastes air and time, but you can hear breaths turn faster. A second shell lands closer on the West Bank approach, throwing up frozen soil. The far bank infantry shouts brief, urgent commands. A cart that has just crossed lurches sideways as the horse shies, and for a moment Sokolov sees disaster. The cart could stop, block the ramp, force the next load to halt on ice. He sprints, not running, not fully, but the fastest controlled movement he can manage on slick planks, and grabs the cart's wheel spoke. He shoves, boots digging, guiding it back onto line while the far bank men haul the horse's head straight and slap its flank. "Move!" Sokolov barks, and this time he does not keep his voice low. The river is loud enough now that secrecy is gone. The cart clears the ramp. On the east bank, Karpov's whistle shrieks once, sharp, commanding. It means stop. The next vehicle freezes on the causeway, not on the ice, exactly as drilled. Sokolov turns back and sees the lane's damage, a plank shattered, a rail log splintered, a gap where the stake line used to guide tires. In daylight, those gaps are lethal. A truck that drifts into them will ride off the reinforced ribs, and then no amount of courage will matter. "Repair," he orders, and his men are already crawling forward with replacement planks and wire. They work as if they are repairing a weapon in the middle of firing it. One man holds a plank in place, another hammers it down. Kostya pours water along the seam so it freezes and binds. In minutes, the deck is continuous again, scarred, patched but unbroken. Behind them, the pontoon foreman shouts to his teams to keep floating sections moving into place. The heavy bridge will take hours, and hours are what the offensive never wants to give. But the alternative is worse. Thaw, shellfire, or a single overloaded crossing that collapses and turns momentum into a traffic jam of dead steel. Across the river, the sound of fighting inside Kingisepp shifts again. Less frantic now, more directional. Soviet fire is pushing west through the streets. The bridgehead is no longer a shallow bite in the bank. It is widening, deepening, becoming a foothold that can protect the crossing instead of merely depending on it. Sokolov pauses only long enough to look down through the cut in the ice at the pontoon section rocking beneath the lane. Black water slides past, indifferent. He realizes with a cold clarity that the impossible part is not that they built a crossing overnight. The impossible part is that they are still keeping it alive. And as another ammunition truck is waved forward, one at a time, steady, disciplined, you can feel the Luga being forced into a new role. Not obstacle, not boundary, but conveyor belt for an army in motion. Order of the day. 1st February 1944, Luga River crossing, Kingisepp sector, Leningrad Front. Morning. The sun never truly rises like it does in warmer places. It bleeds in grey at first, then a dirty white that makes the snow glare and the smoke look thicker than it is. Senior Sergeant Sokolov stands on the east bank ramp and watches the lane across the Luga, like you'd watch a living thing that might turn on you. The crossing is scarred now. Patched planks, splintered rails, cloth markers replaced with fresh strips torn from whatever fabric men could spare. It looks too light for what it's doing. It is doing it anyway. A cart comes down the causeway. 2 horses, a driver with his shoulders hunched, the load stacked with ammunition crates and bundled mortar bombs. The traffic control man raises his hand, checks the spacing, then drops it in a clean motion. Go. The cart rolls onto the deck. Sokolov feels the vibration through his boots even before he sees the midstream flex. The pontoon-supported cut holds, ropes singing faintly under load. The cart stays centered, guided by the remaining stakes. No stop, no panic. The horses pick their way over the planks as if they understand that hesitation is worse than fear. On the far bank, the bridgehead is no longer a thin line of men pressed into snow. There are now shapes moving with purpose. Stretcher teams, ammunition carriers, a crew dragging the tail of the ZIS-3 to a new angle. You can hear the gunfire again, measured now steady, an anchor sound that tells everyone the far side is becoming an actual position, not a gamble. Lieutenant Karpov appears beside Sokolov, face wind-burned, eyes ringed dark from a night without sleep. He holds a folded paper in his gloved hand, the edges already softening in damp cold. A runner has brought it down from higher headquarters. Karpov doesn't read it like poetry. He reads it like a signal flare, briefly, clearly, and with intent. Troops of the Leningrad Front have forced the river Luga, and today, February 1st, captured the town and railway junction of Kingisepp. For a moment, nobody speaks. The words don't make the river any safer or the enemy any less lethal, but they do something else. They make the night's work real. They tell the men standing ankle-deep in snow and splinters that they didn't just build a crossing, they built the hinge on which a town turned. A few soldiers grin without showing teeth. Someone mutters, "So it's true." Someone else, quieter, "Then Narva next." Sokolov doesn't smile. He looks at the lane and sees only what it still demands: repairs, discipline, spacing, and hours of labour before Thor or German guns decide to end the argument. The pontoon foreman strides up, shouting to his men as they drag another boat section down the causeway. "Faster! Align it, no slack in the cables." A proper floating bridge is forming in pieces, boats nosed into cut ice openings, cables tightened back to bank anchors, decking prepared to span between supports. It will not be finished in an hour, but it is the future. The ice road was the emergency. The pontoon bridge is how the offensive eats. A German shell lands far enough away that it throws up only a distant bloom of snow. A reminder, even in retreat, the enemy can still bite. Karpov folds the paper and tucks it into his coat, as if saving it for later proof that this morning happened. Then he turns to Sokolov. "Your squad stays at the ice lane until the pontoon is ready," he says. "After that, you transfer to the west bank with the next engineer detachment. There will be demolitions in Kingisepp, mines, booby traps, the usual." Sokolov nods once. It feels like agreeing to a second night without having finished the first. He steps onto the lane again, moving toward midstream with a hammer and a coil of wire. A plank seam has opened where repeated loads have chewed the ice below. Kostya follows with a fuel can of water, its metal rim already crusted. They kneel, hands working in the cold. Hammer, wire, water. Patch. Bind. Freeze. The bridge lives by 1,000 small decisions. As they work, another truck idles forward on the east bank causeway. The driver leans out, waiting for the signal, face tight with fatigue and impatience. Behind him, more vehicles form a line in the trees like a shadowed convoy, engines coughing in the cold. Sokolov raises his arm toward the traffic control post and makes the signal. Hold. Not yet. Not while the seam is open. When the repair is done, he taps the plank with the hammer. Solid. Then he lifts his hand again. 2 short motions. 1 vehicle only. The rope barrier drops. The truck begins to roll. You can feel, watching it, that the crossing has become what the war always turns things into. A routine that is still lethal if anyone forgets the rules. On the far bank, Kingisepp streets swallow men and supplies. The sound of fighting drifts farther west, away from the river, as if the town is exhaling the enemy out of its buildings. Somewhere beyond that, new rivers wait. New ice, new banks to carve. Sokolov stands at midstream as the truck approaches, breath-fogging, eyes narrowed, listening for the river's voice under the decking. The Luga has not been defeated. It has been managed, for a night, for a morning, for as long as the engineers can keep persuading it. And when the pontoon bridge finally takes the heavy loads, when the ice lane can be allowed to rest, Sokolov will shoulder his tools, cross to the west bank, and follow the offensive toward the next impossible line on the map. Sappers do not get to keep what they build. They only get to build it fast enough that others can move.